Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome once again to a weekly media briefing and public health update with Montgomery County Executive Marc Elrich. I'm Lorna Virgili, Hispanic Public Information Officer. Thank you for joining us today. And also joining us today here as guests are Mr. Sean O'Donnell, who's Program Administrator of Public Health, Emergency Preparedness and Response for the Department of Health and Human Services, Dr. James Bridgers, who is the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services, Dr. Earl Stoddard, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer, and two special guests today, Dr. Scott Bruton, who is the Director of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. He's here to talk about rent stabilization bill, and Raphael Murphy, who is the Director of the Office of Grants Management, and he's here to talk about this year's community grant process. Members of the media, remember to ask permission to ask questions during the different Q&A portions that we're going to have throughout this presentation by raising your hand. And this meeting is being recorded. Now it is to you, Mr. County Executive. Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm okay. And I want to thank everybody for joining us again today. Yesterday, the Montgomery County Council passed the countywide rent stabilization bill. This bill sets a limit on rent increases to inflation plus 3%, capped at 6%. I'll sign this bill into law as soon as it reaches my desk so we can start helping renters without delay. This victory is for the 35% of Montgomery County residents who rent, and it's for the entire community stability. It brings much needed certainty and clarity for both tenants and landlords, ensuring a fair return to landlords when they're making necessary repairs. While this bill is an important step forward, I do want to note this was definitely a compromise bill. I realized that what we needed to do, and I want to comment on it a little bit. The bill does allow a rent increase of 3% above inflation without having to show any need for that increase. And yes, it caps at 6%, but if landlords were to take the full 6% each year, it would place enormous burdens on large numbers of low-income households in our community who would have a very hard time keeping pace with annual 6% rent increases, which rarely have gone up anywhere close to 6% a year. Historically in Montgomery County, we've used voluntary rent guidelines, and the voluntary rent guidelines set rent increases in the inflation rate, and actually said that the county government should work to talk with landlords to get them to lower increases that exceed the inflation rate if they can't justify the rent increases without increased costs. So this weakens somewhat what we have been doing before, but it does have the certainty of providing an actual cap. And for a lot of people, that's going to be a good thing. We're going to closely monitor what happens. And I hope that given that rent increases have averaged less than 30% for most of the last 30 years, with no rent stabilization in place, that the previous pattern is going to remain the rule and not the exception. And while we don't often relate to our business communities when we talk about this subject, lower wage workers typically work for county businesses. And if rents rise at 6% a year, it's going to drive these workers out of the county. And it could have consequences for small businesses trying to keep their workforce. So this isn't simply a housing issue. It has impacts on family stability. It also has impacts on business stability. I was proud that when we raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and we had to make sure that it was indexed to inflation. At the time, we heard from a lot of people who thought it was too much. They predicted the universe would collapse and it would be the end of civilization as we know it, and they were completely wrong. And while we're not asking for a change in the minimum wage law, I suspect if we were to propose amending the law to match the rental law and allowing an increase of 3% plus inflation, people would ask us why we're doing that. I would guess that opponents of these rents would be furious if we tied the minimum wage increase to the rents bill, but we're not going to do that. Additionally, the bill exempts new buildings for 23 years, which is well beyond the typical 15 years. This is a chart that shows all properties that are covered, 133,000 rental properties. These are the ones I think that are not covered. These are the ones that are part of the rolling coverage. So there are 133,000 units who aren't covered right now. 729 were built after 2020, 22,000 were built between 2010 and 2019, and another almost 16,000 were built between 2000 and 2009. The law sets 2020 as the baseline, and each year the number of the units are excluded from coverage for 23 years after they're built. So in the next year, units that were built in 2020 will fall under coverage after the 23 years goes out. So it's a rolling period that determines when coverage is extended to some of these properties. As you can see, nearly 30% of our rental units aren't going to be covered when the legislation takes effect. Some have pointed out that we've got an existing affordable housing program. It's called the Moderately Priced Dwelling Unit Program, or MPDUs, as everybody calls them. But there are only 6,700 MPD units in the entire county. And in the county this large, this is a pathetically small amount. In fact, if this is someone's idea of an effective housing program, it's pretty much a joke. For example, almost 50,000 households earn less than $50,000 in this county, and most would not be eligible for an MPDU. And these are families that typically spend 50 and 60% of their income on housing. I also want to note that the bill is carefully designed to include a fair return process so that if for some reason the up to 6% increase is insufficient to cover a landlord's cost increases, then landlords can apply for a larger increase to cover those costs and maintain their profitability. Similarly, the bill includes a separate provision to allow capital increases based on capital improvements the building owners need to make. If major repairs require much greater investments than typical maintenance, they can file for an increase on their capital improvement petition that will allow them to maintain their net operating income from before the need for this increase, and again, help them maintain their profitability. So for the two reasons, either rising costs or major capital improvements, that a landlord could be expected to need to go above the rent guidelines, this bill includes the mechanisms that allow them to do that. So this idea that they were going to be trapped with 6% is simply not true. If they can demonstrate the need, they get additional rent increases. Overall, I'm very pleased that this bill passed, and it's going to help protect the long-term affordability of housing in this county. The success is a result of a collective effort of council members, advocates, our housing staff, and community members. I want to extend my gratitude to the activists and the advocates and the renters of Montgomery County who tirelessly pushed for this legislation. I've been involved in this issue going back to when I was a council member in Tacoma Park. I've seen firsthand what meaningful rent stabilization can do, and it does make a real difference in people's lives. Stable housing costs provide security for families, eliminate the fear of unreasonable rent increases, forcing them out of their neighborhoods. From a teacher and school and learning perspective, stable rents allow people to remain in communities. It reduces student mobility, which is actually a positive for helping student learning. I especially want to thank Scott Britton, the new director of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. Scott has done an outstanding job explaining, working with, and educating and addressing council members' concerns. I also want to thank Scott and my housing team for all the efforts to produce, preserve, and protect affordable housing in this county. Let's continue to work together to make Montgomery County a place where affordable housing, is accessible to all, and our communities can thrive. I'm going to turn this over now to Scott for some of his comments, and then we'll take your questions on the bill. Scott?
Thank you, County Executive. I'd like to start off giving some thanks as well. I want to thank the County Executive for his long-term leadership on trying to institute rent stabilization here in Montgomery County. I also want to thank all the council members and their staff with whom we worked very hard over the past several months to create these bills, then to amend these bills into what was finally passed yesterday, as well as the advocates and stakeholders who gave so much input. to shape these bills over time. And lastly, to the staff, especially Nicole Catravanos at DHCA, who helped along the way with our fiscal impact analysis, as well as technical information as needed. The county executive covered the range of what this bill is going to do very well. I'll only add that we're very excited to have rent stabilization as one of the many tools in Montgomery County's toolbox for increasing housing stability and affordability. And while I'm very excited, folks at DHCA are very excited about the bill being passed, we now embark on the process of writing regulations and setting up the infrastructure in order to administer that over the next several months. And so it's going to be a sprint, and we look forward to engaging with the council as well as with stakeholders in that process.
Thank you, Dr. Bruton. Members of the media, we're going to open it up right now for Q&A regarding the rent stabilization bill. Any questions, please raise your hand. We'll give you a second or two. Dan Brendel, thank you for joining us, Washington Business Journal. Good afternoon.
Yeah, hi. Good afternoon, and thank you everybody for your time today. I have a sort of a two-part question stemming from the 23-year exemption, which I understand applies to new construction as well as substantial rehabilitations. So from the perspective of people who want more rent regulation, 23 years strikes me as a pretty long time. If I delivered a building today, I wouldn't be regulated in my rent until 2046. Is that right? What
That's
has
right.
been developers' response to you about, how have developers responded to you about that 23-year exemption? Are they happy with it? Are they still upset about it? Or what feedback have you got from the development community?
I suspect the only number they would have been happy with was forever, or if I was going to express it as the term infinity. They didn't want any regulation. 23 years is a long time. The standard is 15 years. The whole point of the time period is to allow building to settle in. Like the rents you set the first year may not work. Your expenses could be higher. So what you want is for a building to establish that your operating expenses are predictable and normal. It doesn't take 23 years to do that. And frankly, the compromise had been, well, I know the advocates were willing to go to 15 years, which is also a long time. And 8 years is actually a reasonable period to establish normalcy. So I doubt if they're happy, but they'll probably have flipped the property twice by the time it gets to 23 years. So it won't be their problem. I really don't think it's a problem.
Well, from the other
tenants. Yeah. From the other perspective, for tenants, this is a lot of people who are excluded from protection. And it's unfortunate. I mean, the only consolation, if we've not done a very good job of providing a lot of affordable units to begin with. And so it's a smaller portion of the population. It's a lot of units. But it's not just, the low end of the spectrum that gets hurt. We heard from, young people who are just entering the job market, and they're not making wages that allow them to afford, market rate housing. And the best example would be like in a place like Bethesda. An MPDU in Bethesda is affordable to people making basically between 60 and 70% of area median income, which is something north of $60,000 to $70,000. If you make more than that, you can't get an MPDU. But the typical rent for a one bedroom in the new construction in Bethesda is around $2,500 to $3,000. So you make too little money to afford a market, and you make too much money to get an MPDU. And so our current housing policies pose a real problem in terms of who they protect and who does not protect it. And it goes back, and I've said this before, when the MPDU program was created, it was meant to serve, and people use this phrase, teachers, firefighters, and policemen. because that was the low income workers in the county. Kind of hard to imagine. Then I guess they weren't thinking about clerical and the really lower menial job, but the county wasn't blanketed with as much retail and restaurants as we have today. We've got a lot of people today who work in these lower income jobs. That wasn't the case when this bill was passed. I think if we were doing this again, we would take into account, where the incomes are in the county and provide affordability for more income levels. And I think you're going to see legislation. In fact, I know you're going to see legislation from us that will try to address a broader range of affordability in housing so that we don't have this big gap between you earn too much to get an MPDU and you don't make enough to be able to rent a market unit. If we want people to stay here, and particularly we keep saying we need young people to stay here, that's not a good position to support those people coming into this economy.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just to kind of sum up, I mean, what I hear you saying is that, yes, you support this bill. Yes, you won't veto it, but this 23-year exemption you see is a pretty significant concession and something that greatly weakens its efficacy.
That's fair to
Is that
say.
right?
And excluding 30% of the existing housing does weaken it somewhat. I mean, it's just
Okay,
like,
well, thank you very much for your time.
Dan, I think the point is not just low income people are struggling to make their rents. And so allowing an unconstricted environment is not necessarily good.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank
Members
you
of
for
the
your
media? Thank you. Members of the media, any other questions regarding the rent stabilization bill? Please raise your hand. No more questions on this topic. Thank you, Dr. Bruton, for joining us this afternoon. Thank you. You can stay or you can go. Mr. County Executive, back to you.
So thank you, Scott. And I really am pleased that we were able to do what we did yesterday. And it kind of leads into our next topic. Rent isn't the only place where we have households struggling. And we're now accepting applications for $5.75 million in community grants. These grants will support youth, seniors, residents, and people with disabilities in underserved communities in Montgomery County. The application for these grants is now open and it's going to close Sunday, August 13th. We know that many people in our community do need help, and the demand for assistance from organizations that meet these needs is at a record high. COVID may be over, but the impacts of COVID have not gone away. Employment certainly has not returned to previous levels, and so we continue to see large numbers of people still not in the workforce. Many people, particularly in service industries, have seen reduction in hours and reduction in staffing because, for example, many restaurants, while they're open, aren't doing the level of business they did before. So some have shortened their hours and some have reduced the amount of staff to match the number of clients who actually are coming in. So there are a lot of different issues out there remaining in the community. Food insecurity remains high. We've had, similar pressures on providing food that kind of peaked during COVID. So we're well aware that all the problems has not gone away. So we're working diligently to develop a grants process that ensures equitable funding opportunities for nonprofits across the county. And over the past 5 years, we've engaged with our community partners to implement reform, and I'll say the council was helpful in this. And our new FY24 community grant process, as a result, it encourages innovation from both longstanding and new partners while reducing administrative burdens on our nonprofit community. Last year, we established the Office of Grants Management and appointed Raphael Murphy as its first director, and I'm pleased that he's with us here today to discuss the grants program. So I do urge the media to spread the word about this. You're in a day with limited advertising, being able to tell people about these opportunities is going to be important. And I encourage county nonprofits to apply for these funds, and together we're going to make a significant positive impact on the lives of our fellow residents. So, Raphael, I'll now turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, County Executive. And I'll just share a brief slide deck for you, and a PDF version of this should be available for folks who want to see it. Okay, can folks see my screen? All right. So this presentation will go over the grants reform a bit, because I think this provides helpful context of the changes that we made, why we made them. Then going into the grants programs that are currently open. So the community grants reform really began with an Office of Legislative Oversight report way back in 2018. And this report, which is still available and the hyperlink is acted to it, pointed out some issues with the county council's grant side. This opened up a series of discussions on looking at all the county executive and the county council grants and how grants were done in Montgomery County and where there are ways we could improve to bring ourselves more in line with other jurisdictions to help our nonprofit partners. There were a series of working groups throughout 2019 between Montgomery County government internal stakeholders, the nonprofit community. Nonprofit Montgomery was really key in organizing a lot of nonprofit engagement in this process. And they came up with 6 consensus recommendations that the county government and then the nonprofit community agreed upon were things that needed to be done. One of those was the creation of Office of Grants Management. That bill was signed almost 2 years ago today. Bill 36-19 that created my office to coordinate grants policy and processes. And then last year, my office went into being, became active based on the legislation. And then one thing we did was in January and February of this year, we did a further nonprofit survey, getting their feedback on reforms and how these should be implemented. Over 200 nonprofits submitted responses, and we had a very diverse selection of diversely led organizations participate. So the we're still mining that data, but it's turned in some interesting results in how we can achieve equity. So in terms of the 6 kind of most concrete recommendations that came out of the process were, and looking at our steps in actually achieving all 6 of those recommendations is, we wanted to combine the county executive and county council grants processes. It just made no sense to have 2 separate ones. That was done in 2021. We wanted to make the community grants process more outcomes driven, really look what is going to be accomplished with the funds and the resources, making that the determination of who gets funding, who gets continued funding. We're implementing that in full scale with starting in FY24, which is this year. Looking at a grants office to manage the community grants process as well. That's my office that was created with Bill 36-19 and was active a year ago. Creating an Aspire grant program to help nonprofit capacity. This was a key recommendation, and that there is a recognition that the nonprofit community in Montgomery County, while in some areas is extremely strong, if not national trendsetters, there are other areas, especially in certain communities, where the nonprofits are very weak, don't have a lot of capacity, don't have a lot of know-how in terms of how to access funds and implement programs. So with the county executive's FY23 budget, which was passed by council, and then the FY24 budget, there's a significant amount of additional resources to put into just building the capacity of nonprofits, helping them do their core business better so that they can not only be more successful with our money, but be able to go after state and federal opportunities to bring more outside resources into the county to supplement what we give. And then the grant agreement tool. Traditionally, the county has only given out funding as procurement contracts, which often have not been the right tool or legal agreement for actually giving money to nonprofits to implement, certain types of programs. So in FY23, we created a grant agreement tool through Office of Grants Management. And in FY24, this year, we're going to be bringing that to scale, using it much broadly, not just for community grants, but for, other department programs as they see fit. And then there's also an effort, there's a recognition that one of the problems with community grants was some nonprofit programs are partially funded out of the department budget, partially funded out of community grants, and it created a lot of problems for both the partners as well as the county. And so there was a lot of shifting of funds over the last 4 years to consolidate these resources, not so that these nonprofit partners don't have 2 unstable sources of funding, that everything is set for a program in one place. So all of these 6 recommendations have been achieved starting with this year. And big part of this office, and it's built into the legislation, is that creates my office is the focus on racial equity and social justice. And so how we integrate equity and how we distribute funds in terms of just kind of the intellectual framework of how we look at equity in terms of grants. The big core document is Justice Funders, which is a nonprofit looking at grants reform and philanthropy reform based out of California. And the Choir book is a series of concrete recommendations on how to implement grants reform in a more equitable way. So that's a tremendous resource. We've been using that a lot in terms of how we envision changing our process. This resource was given to me by our Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice as kind of a best practice for us to follow. And we use that very closely. Nonprofit Finance Fund has done some tremendous analysis and work and has recommendations looking at the post-COVID world and how you can achieve equity in the post-COVID world and the impacts that that has had. Trust-based philanthropy has a lot of good work. Our Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice produces what's called racial equity impact analysis, looking deeply into county issues. Those that are related to grants or funding have been a tremendous source of resource and recommendations how we can reform our process. I have ongoing and close engagement with the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice in terms of me running things by them, getting their feedback on how can we reform this. And then just reaching out to the community, our diverse communities in Montgomery County and seeing what their issues are, how we can adapt ourselves to better fit them. A big part of the literature on equity reform in terms of grants is just simply streamlining the application. We've really focused on only collecting the materials we need to make an effective decision on whether to award funding or not. So to chop off all the rest of the fat and just get right to the decision. So that streamlines the application, it's less burden on our nonprofit partners. And then also, and coupled with that is enhanced training and support for the applicants. And then when we're looking at who selects, who gets the grants, choosing review committees that represent Montgomery County, look like Montgomery County from both within and outside of Montgomery County government, training review committee members and how to take a look at applications with an equity lens, not just a purely technical perspective, and then focus on SME, bring people in who really have the grassroots perspective of what's going on in communities, be part of these decision-making processes. Because they know what programs are most needed, they know the nuances of these issues. And then integrate, when we develop our scoring criteria, integration of cultural competence, because that's a key factor in which organization is really going to be successful in implementing a program. So the two programs that we have open right now, the first one, which County Executive mentioned, is the FY24 Community Grants. This is really targeted at emerging and established nonprofits. It's big. We're looking for bigger programs, more impactful programs, and we're providing, a bigger range of funding available. There's $5.75 million available. There's awards can range anywhere between $50,000 and $375,000. This will be for the calendar year 2024. So the programs will start on January 1 and December 31st. What there will be the option to do multi-year grant agreements where folks do not have to apply year after year. If it's a program that needs time to get going, we can give them a multi-year grant agreement pending council, provides funding. This opened in late June, and again, will close Sunday, August 13th at midnight. In terms of the other smaller project in this program, and this one is the direct result of feedback from our nonprofit community and is proof that we're listening and making adjustments, is the Community Projects Funds is really tailored for small emerging volunteer-led programs. We've historically supported a lot of very, very small projects with small amounts of money, but these types of small organizations that are hyper community focused, especially volunteer-led ones, really do a lot with small amounts of money. So it was felt that they needed a separate space to be able to access resources from the county without competing with the bigger organizations and programs. So the county executive's budget, which council approved, includes that space. There's $1 million for these types of programs. We'll be doing quarterly competitions with $250,000 in each quarter. Awards are smaller, $5,000 to $25,000, but again, historically, folks have been able to do a tremendous amount with small amounts of money. A flexible range of up to 6 months. It opened up yesterday, and it will close Sunday, August 20th at midnight. And to apply for these and other county grant programs as they open up, visit mcmdgrants.smapply.org. And there's contact information for me and my staff. If you have questions about our processes and how to access resources, please do feel ready to reach out. And thank you. That's That's my presentation.
Thank you, Director Murphy. Members of the media, we're going to open it up right now for the Q&A portion of the presentation regarding community grants. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. Any questions regarding community grants? PowerPoint, the presentation is right here on the chat for those of you who might need it. No questions? Going once? Twice? All righty then. Thank you, Director Murphy, for joining us this afternoon. Mr. County Executive, I think we move forward with other topics and public health update.
Other topics, and thank you, Raphael. I want to highlight another crucial initiative that's positively going to impact tens of thousands of families here in the county. We recently secured more state grant funding for a new effort called Montgomery Connects, our digital equity and inclusion program. Through this program, we aim to provide another 34,000 low-income families with much needed access to computers. And imagine the possibilities that we bridge when we're able to help people cross the digital divide and empower these households with the tools that are essential for success. When I was growing up, you didn't need a computer. In fact, we didn't have computers at home to do schoolwork or do research. And today, there's a real divide between families that have real computers and families who simply have a phone that can occasionally pretend to be a computer. Doesn't work well for research. And there are a lot of families whose kids don't have the benefits that others have in being able to use computers at home. So our goal is to put a Chromebook laptop in the hands of families that qualify to be eligible. You have to be enrolled in a benefit program like SNAP food benefits, Medicaid, free school lunch, WIC, or SSI. We also include families benefiting from the Pell Grants, housing choice vouchers, and project-based rental assistance. Additionally, those enrolled in affordable connectivity or lifeline internet or telephone discount programs will also qualify. Households earning less than 200% of the federal poverty level are also eligible, and that means a family of four earning less than $60,000 would qualify. Having a computer is not just a luxury, it's really a necessity in today's world. And while schools can provide access to computers for children in school, we understand that every family member should have their own tool for learning, working, and staying connected. And that's why Maryland Connected Devices program was developed to meet this very specific need. Currently, low-income families constitute about 21% of the county households, but they make up a significant 60% of households without computers. The disparity is striking, and we're working to level the playing field and close that gap. By providing access to technology, we're empowering our residents to thrive in today's digital age. I don't know what I would do without a computer right now, and I'm sure most of us would be puzzled by what we would do as well. We have coming up is a special event this weekend. It's the Farm Tour weekend that celebrates our deep connection to the land and the hardworking farmers who cultivate it. It's time for the annual Farm Tour in Harvestdale, which is taking place on Saturday and Sunday, where 21 farms from our cherished agricultural reserve will open their doors to the public. This event's a fantastic opportunity for everyone to engage with our local community, support our farmers, and experience the joy of fresh, locally grown food. Come out and shop local, savor the taste of farm fresh produce, and witness the beauty of these working farms. You also have a chance to get up close with farm animals and learn about the intricacies of farming and understand what it is as a way of life. These tours are self-guided and driving-based, allowing you to create your own unique experience. Most participating locations and events are free to attend, and it provides a wonderful chance for everybody in our community to partake in this agricultural celebration. Some sites or activities may request a small fee for specific experiences like fruit or flower picking. Additionally, there will be products, food, and drinks available for purchase at the farm tour locations. Nearly 1/3 of the county's land is dedicated to agricultural use, so we take immense pride in preserving this land for farming, making us the nation's leader in farmland preservation. With 558 farms and 350 horticultural businesses flourishing in our county, the economic impact of farming is substantial, contributing $282 million annually. Supporting our local farmers is not just an opportunity, it's a responsibility we all share. And by participating in the Farm Tour, you play a crucial role in sustaining economic health of our Montgomery County community. I encourage county residents to embark on the Farm Tour and harvest sale and discover the wonders of the agricultural reserve and forge lasting connections with our hardworking farmers. On a sad note, it's with real sadness that I have been pointing out that we're remembering and honoring the life of former County Attorney Mark Hansen, who passed away last weekend. Mark was committed to public service. For an impressive 37 years, he worked tirelessly in the county attorney's office. And the last 12 years, he served as the county attorney. In doing so, he earned the distinction of being the longest serving county attorney in our county's history. And throughout this remarkable career, Mark provided invaluable advice and guidance to multiple county executives, countless county council members, thousands of colleagues, and he was a trusted mentor, and he encouraged and trained numerous attorneys who went on to make their mark in the legal profession. Some became judges, assistant Maryland attorney generals, federal attorneys, and others have risen through the ranks of the office of the county attorney. During the challenging and complex early months of COVID-19, his legal acumen played a pivotal role in guiding us through critical decisions we had to make to keep our residents safe. As you can imagine, the county was thrust in a position of doing things that we never imagined we would do. And that means we needed to be very careful that we stayed within the legal bounds. And he played a really crucial role in making sure that things we did in the urgency of the moment also were legal in the urgency of the moment. And I would always thank him for that. Mark touched the lives of so many, leaving an indelible mark on the legal community and beyond. And our hearts go out to Mark Hansen's family, friends, and colleagues. And Mark is going to be greatly missed. The COVID update, about to turn you over to Emergency Preparedness Manager Sean O'Donnell. First, I'll just note that community threat remains low. And for the first time since the pandemic began, the total number of Americans dying each day is no longer above the historical averages. The number referred to nationally as excess deaths has been elevated since March of 2020. It's a long time. A sign of the grip that the pandemic had on us nationwide that now seems like a true era with a beginning and now an end. There will be a new booster shot available this fall that scientists are working on now. It will likely not be a bivalent booster, meaning that only the strains of the current virus will be used. And I'd like to bring on Emergency Preparedness Manager Sean O'Donnell with his report before I take your questions. So Sean, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. As I usually do, I'll take you through our pulse report. Want to start with the most recent news from our federal partners on the COVID transition. As we've mentioned in the past, there's been plans to move COVID resources into the private sector as most healthcare it currently exists. We've got some updates from them on this. And this includes the new booster that they expect will be available mid to late September. Again, as our county executive mentioned, it will likely be a monovalent shot that targets the most recent strains. And then there'll be updated recommendations as to which version each age range should get. This will be the first time that the private sector healthcare will be ordering directly from the manufacturer as opposed to the distribution through the United States government. And most people will access these vaccines as well as therapeutics like Paxlovid through their current healthcare providers. Additionally to COVID, we've mentioned that there will be the first US approved vaccine for RSV, which will be initially targeted for our populations who are 60 and older. We saw last year, as most years, it's younger populations who are the most likely to get RSV, but it's our seniors who are most likely to become seriously ill. So there's this new recommendation for the vaccine that will be available in the fall. The US government is not completely done distributing vaccine. We're very happy to hear that they are putting together a bridge access program. And that means that they will make vaccine available through the state and local health departments to ensure that those who are uninsured or underinsured have access to no-cost vaccinations. They'll also make it available to the HRSA funded health centers. We have a number of those within the county. They'll also make those therapeutics available to those healthcare facilities to treat their eligible patients. Additionally, the CDC is going to partner with the pharmacy chains to ensure that they can offer vaccinations and therapeutics at no cost to those who are, again, are uninsured. So again, we're very happy to see that this will allow very good access to the updated booster shots and ongoing access to therapeutics for those in. Just going on, again, this was a New York Times reported story. Multiple data systems have shown that excess deaths now have fallen below the expected level pre-COVID. However, that doesn't mean that no one is dying. The CDC estimates that there's about 80 people per day across the United States who die with a COVID diagnosis. That doesn't mean they're specifically dying from COVID. In many of those cases, it may be a contributing illness to other factors. When we look at what that means in our area, the CDC does share data. You can see the top graph is across the United States, and you see that during some of the earlier years, those excess deaths were significantly above what we would expect, up to 30% more than we would have expected at a given time. And over recent years, it's dropped to about 10% more than what we would expect, which is still a lot of additional deaths each year that are potentially preventable. You can see within Maryland, those numbers have trended down much more quickly, and we hope that is as a result of the high rates of vaccination, the high access to therapeutics in our state. Again, we'd like to keep these as low as possible. Looking at our community levels, we've seen a very small uptick in our cases per 100,000 residents. It's still at a very, very low rate compared to the last several years. And we've seen just a few additional hospitalizations compared to last week. That uptick in hospitalizations across the state, that amounts to about 10 more people who have a COVID diagnosis at a hospital across the state. So not a significant increase, but we are, as we always are, monitoring these numbers. And finally, just reminding folks that we are still giving vaccinations. We're still delivering free test kits through our libraries. We're looking to continue partnering with our state to receive these test kits and make sure they're available to our locals through the fall. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to our director, Dr. Bridgers, and see if he has any additional details he would like to add.
Good afternoon, Mr. O'Donnell. No additional details for me. I just want to note that as we transition from our summer months to our fall months, there's been an uptick in summer colds over the summer. So remember those public health practices: wash your hands for 20 seconds or more, cover your cough, and be mindful of the transmission. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bridgers and Mr. O'Donnell. Dr. Stoddard, do you have any comments?
Nothing to open today, just take questions, I think.
Thank you, members of the media. We'll take now general questions regarding any topics and or public health update. Raise your hand and we'll call on you. Any questions for the public officials? No questions today? You sure? All right, going once, twice. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I guess we're done for today. We'll see you again next time. Stay safe. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, everybody.